Hi, and welcome to the CREO podcast. I'm Raymond Omizu, co-founder of Clinical Research IO, a Boston-based company creating the next generation of software for clinical trial sites. I'm here with Dan Sfera, the founder of Clinical Trials Guru and a site owner himself. Today, we're going to talk to Dan about how he got into the business and what his thoughts are on the state of the industry. How are you, Dan?
Good. How's it going?
Good, not too bad. So tell us all, I think a lot of us who have been on YouTube have seen your videos of Clinical Trials Guru. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry, how you went about, becoming a site owner and ultimately finding yourself, with a pretty big following in YouTube?
Yeah, well, the site owner was definitely first, and that was by accident. I was a pre-med student, and my GPA wasn't good enough to get into most med schools.
Right.
So I tried to look for alternative things I can do, and clinical research was one of them. My dad was a principal investigator at the time with University of Southern California, and him and a colleague started a private research clinic, and actually there were 2 or 3 other doctors that joined. Well, they weren't managing it properly because they're doctors, and it fell apart. However, I got my experience there as a coordinator, and then I took over the business when everyone sort of abandoned it. And so I made the decision right then and there. I'm not going to go to med school anymore. I'm going to be a site owner. So I had to learn on the fly. I took over 4 ongoing studies with these were high enrolling studies. Previous coordinators all left. So it was literally me and 4 angry monitors figuring out what to do. And it took me about a year to just kind of get competent enough to not make deviations, and then another year to be comfortable enough to take on new studies. But I learned very quickly, the attention to detail, QA, but I also learned the financial aspects of this, right? Like it could be very lucrative, especially when you're a one-man show. I had no overhead, so it was just me. I learned very quickly the amount of money you can make here, and I thought this would be a good thing to do as a career. So, and I probably wasn't going to get into med school ever. Let's just be real. But I'm glad I made that decision, and it's opened up a lot of doors ever since.
Yeah, that's a story that we see a lot. Just this idea of a family business, sort of learning on the job, like sort of people just go stumbling into this and kind of figuring it out on their own. Uh, Sounds like that was basically how you learned this. No one taught you. You just had to learn it on your own.
Had to, yeah. I got in right when the paper CRF was switching to EDC. So I think the mistakes I made in my first year, I couldn't get away with now in a 2018 world where we're talking about eSource, and
Right.
we're going to talk about that, I'm sure. But I would have not survived had it been 2018. But since it was 2005, you had more room to, I guess, make errors back then because they just weren't caught as quickly. And the industry wasn't as efficient back then as it is now. So
Sure.
these days they can find an error in real time, whereas back then you had to wait for every 30 days your monitor would come and physically look at the paper CRF. So I kind of got a extended learning curve because of that.
Sure. And how did you get into the clinical trials guru business?
Yeah, so that wasn't until 5 years later. So from 2005 to 2010, I was doing nothing but building my one site, and then I added 2 new sites. So I had my head down, really interacting with no one, networking with nobody, hiring staff, learning things through CenterWatch, because there were no online resources, so just paying subscriptions to CenterWatch, going to investigator meetings, occasionally networking with other sites, but really no conferences, nothing. It was very insular at that time. And once I started hiring employees and I got to focus on working on my business and not in my business, which is really where my strength is, I started to think of creative ways to bring more patients to the clinics. So the idea for the Clinical Trials Guru, the video blog, was actually to get patients interested in research. It was not to target other researchers. I never thought that's where it's going to take me. But after doing that for 6 to 12 months, I realized the only people watching and sending me questions were other sites. And they were asking me questions completely unrelated to the videos I would make. Or wannabe researchers would watch. Like I would make a video, what is an informed consent, hoping to educate a patient. Well, somebody who wants to open a site watched it and said, hey, thanks for that. You know, it helped me through my SSV. Now at least I know what an informed consent is. So I had to pivot. And unfortunately, I'm still trying to find ways to attract patients to the sites. I, I think that's $1 billion project. If anyone could figure it out, how to use this kind of marketing for patients. I don't think anyone's doing it well, but that's a lofty goal for sometime in the future.
So I can see why people in the industry would have a lot of questions for you and would watch your videos, but why do you think more patients didn't tune in?
That's what we're trying to figure out. I think it's just boils down to a lack of awareness. I have a theory on this. In my theory, we actually have a startup that's focused on content marketing for patients. It's called The Clinical Scoop. We do Alzheimer's talk. My hypothesis is no patient is searching for clinical trials unless they are very motivated, like cancer patients or people looking for treatments. But just your general medicine, or what we were doing at the time, central nervous system disorder studies, nobody's actually searching for clinical trials because they don't even really know what that is. Well, they're searching for treatments online. And if you can create content in that space and then gently introduce the idea of clinical research, I think that person, whoever does that, will succeed. Hopefully that's us, but it really takes a lot of resources to put good content together. So the way I was doing it, it was just attracting people who already knew or had a vague idea of what clinical research was, which are usually not patients.
Okay. So you've got your research site network, you've got your clinical trials guru, which is I think an education primarily business. You've got your patient education content marketing business. Do you have anything else? I think you have a CRO as well.
Niche CRO, boutique CRO. Now being in the CRO space for 2 years, I'm realizing that is a means to an end, not a business in and of itself. Much more profitable to have site than a CRO. Like
Is that
much
right?
more.
Because on the site's perspective, they look at the CROs and say, "Look at how much
I
money
know.
they're making."
I know they all do, but you're not going to be quintiles or IQVIA,
Right.
you know. So if you can gain that kind of market share, then you will start making profit margins. But you're not going to be IQVIA. You're going to be a DSCS that is lucky to make 10% profit
Right.
margin on the
Okay.
deals they get. But what we're really trying to do is gain equity into biotech and medical device companies. So the next decade of my career, I think, is going to be spent on the actual sponsor side. And we're working on a couple projects right now, which excites me. So I might just leapfrog the whole CRO thing or just use it to get more of those kind of deals.
Can you give us any hints to what you're going to be working on next? Those two big projects.
Exosomes.
What's that?
Uh, so it's like cellular communication, and I'm no doctor, but I put enough prezzies together to be somewhat dangerous. Cell-to-cell communication. So exosomes, they used to think it was just debris or waste between cells, but actually there's like genetic code, protein code packed in there. So you can manipulate what a neighboring cell does by manipulating the message. So we're looking to regenerate knee cartilage as one example for arthritis sufferers. We're looking for oncology applications, which are way over my head, but we have oncologists that know what they're doing in the lab. So exosomes, actually, the more I'm looking into it, the more exciting that is. And I'm just really lucky to be able to be involved with that kind of a project right now.
It sounds like you're going to the hard sciences. Sounds like
Yeah.
biotech.
I should have gone to med school maybe after all.
Got it. It's not too late.
Yeah, I think it is.
So I guess since you've had so many different perspectives, I'm going to ask you a very broad question. So, I mean, what do you think of this is the general state of the industry? I mean, it's a big question, but what do you think are the major trends that are going on right now?
More studies, faster studies, more efficient studies, cutting out the middlemen as much as possible. So CROs, another reason why I'm not so interested in actually building a CRO. eSource, real-time data, site metrics, transparency between sponsors and sites. That's really where we're headed.
Where we're headed, not necessarily where we are today.
Every year you see a little more of a push in that direction. We're actually starting to see eSource in our studies. Last year we saw, I saw it on one study. This year I'm seeing it on 3 studies at my site where I'm sitting right now. So every year just a little more. And I think these sponsors and CROs are getting better at scraping this data. And I think site selection is going to be impacted by this in the future because of the site metrics and all of those things that at least the big CROs are looking at right now.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about the site selection. I know there's a big push right now for site consolidation into networks. Do you think that's going to have a bigger role in clinical trials?
I actually do. So I think that my theory is CROs will lose market share over time, and site networks or SMOs. I think the SMO is coming back. It fell out of favor for the last decade because of the CROs. I think they're inversely related. And I think they're coming back. I'm talking to a lot of these mid-size pharma, smaller biotechs, and they don't even want to work with CROs. They rather have a site network and then have their own in-house CRAs do the monitoring.
Right. Yeah, we've been calling sites for the last 3 years. Started calling them in 2016, 2017, 2018. Just in the 3 years that we've been calling, we've noticed more sites are being exposed to eSource from sponsors.
Yeah.
Just in the past 3 years.
And that's the way it'll work. I mean, eSource is a great tool. I also think, like I said in my intro, if we had eSource in 2005, I think I would have been out of business in 2 months. So it's a double-edged sword. You got to know what you're doing before you bring and integrate eSource into your clinic.
Yeah, well, hopefully eSource will also make it easier and a little bit faster for new coordinators to get up to speed. Because
I think that too. I do think so. I do think that's the case also.
Yeah. So tell me about your experience working with smaller sites. How are they sort of handling all these changes that are going on? Or do you think they're just doing fine and will continue to do fine? Or do you think there's certain things that they need to do to sort of position themselves to be successful and thrive in the future?
I think the smaller sites or the newer sites that are just getting started now, I think it's actually easier to teach them how to use these new tools because they don't know any better. Like They don't know any alternative. So if you tell them that they're using eSource, that's just what they're going to use. They haven't set up their culture within their site yet or their SOP.
It's natural.
Yeah. The problem with new sites is inexperience from the coordinators and then financing resources. So that's the problem that they have. But, the medium and large size sites face those issues sometimes also.
Yeah. What do you think of siteless trials? Do you think the sites are going to go obsolete, or do you think...
I don't think they will. I do not think sites will go obsolete. I think siteless trials will actually increase the study supply. So we're going to have the same amount of studies every year, more or less. I mean, there's cycles within the market, but I think siteless trials will just add to that. And then the data that they get, they can actually do trials at the sites. It'll be more like proof of concept type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of these large healthcare networks? They're buying up smaller physician practices. Very hard to be a small doctor, right, these days?
That's changing everything.
Yeah. Do you think that's going to have an impact on research, the emergence of these large health networks? Do you think it'd just be another form of the SMO, only integrated into a network?
I don't know if it'll be another form of an SMO. I mean, some of them will. I think a small percentage of them will see research and look at the opportunities there. But I do think that as more private practices are gobbled up by hospital systems, we're going to have a harder time finding research naive PIs. because if you're a PI that's interested in doing research, or if you're a physician interested in doing research, and you're now working within a hospital system, you now need the buy-in from the entire group. And what do most big groups do when they don't understand something? They just ignore it and choose not to pursue it because that's not their core competency. So this industry was relying a lot on research naive physicians to bring in patients for the studies. And yeah, that's slowly starting to go away too. It is harder to find doctors these days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've always believed that research is best done by local PIs who have sweat equity in it. They put their blood, sweat, and tears in it. Harder to do that if you're part of a big institution with rules and oversight and all of that.
The sense of ownership's not there. And I know the PI, whoever signs the 1572 is the one responsible, but it just doesn't feel the same when it's not really your patient. It's just part of a bigger ecosystem.
Right. So in some ways, the health care consolidation may actually not help research in some ways.
Yeah, I'm actually not a fan of it, but let's see what happens in the next 8 years.
Got it. Good. All right, terrific. Well, thank you very much, Dan. That was a fascinating interview. Any parting thoughts before we go?
No. I just think everyone should pay attention to the space. It's definitely where the industry is headed, and always look to improve your workflow and your efficiencies. That's always the right move.
Thank you.